Consequentialism. Consequentialism is a moral framework that judges the morality of an action based solely on its consequences. In other words, the ends justify the means. Let's break it down. Imagine you're faced with a moral dilemma. Consequentialism asks you to consider the potential outcomes of each possible action. For example, let's say you're a doctor with only one dose of a life-saving medicine. Consequentialism would suggest that you should give the medicine to the patient with the highest chance of survival, even if it means letting others suffer. In the context of consequentialism, utilitarianism is a specific theory that falls under this broader moral framework. Utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism that focuses on maximizing overall happiness or pleasure and minimizing suffering or pain. According to utilitarianism, the morally right action is the one that produces the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. The main difference between the two is utilitarianism focuses on happiness or pleasure as what it's trying to maximize, whereas consequentialism may not necessarily prioritize happiness as the ultimate goal. They may focus on different outcomes or criteria for evaluating consequences, such as personal well-being, fairness, or the satisfaction of certain moral principles. Deontology. Deontology is a moral framework that focuses on following moral rules or principles regardless of the consequences. In other words, it's all about doing your duty. Let's break it down. Imagine you're faced with a moral dilemma. Instead of considering the potential outcomes of each action like consequentialism, deontology asks you to follow certain moral rules or duties. For example, let's say you're asked to keep a promise to a friend or tell the truth, even if lying would produce better consequences. Deontology would suggest that you should prioritize following the moral rule, regardless of the potential outcomes. The key idea here is that certain actions are inherently right or wrong, regardless of their consequences. Deontologists believe that moral rules or duties are absolute and must be followed, even if they conflict with maximizing overall good or utility. Ethical egoism. Ethical egoism is a moral framework that places paramount importance on acting in one's own self-interest. In simpler terms, it's about prioritizing your own needs and desires above all else. Let's delve deeper. Picture yourself in a situation where you have to make a tough ethical decision. Ethical egoism would advise you to consider what action serves your own interests best, regardless of its impact on others. For instance, imagine you have an opportunity for a job promotion that could significantly advance your career, but it may involve stepping over others or sacrificing their opportunities. Ethical egoism would justify pursuing the promotion because it benefits you, even if it comes at the expense of others. The core principle here is that individuals have a moral obligation to maximize their own happiness and well-being. Ethical egoists argue that since each person understands their own desires and needs most intimately, they are best equipped to determine what is morally right for themselves. Contractualism. Contractualism is a moral framework that emphasizes the importance of mutual agreement and cooperation among rational agents in determining moral principles. It's like creating a social contract where everyone agrees to abide by certain rules for the greater good. Let's break it down. Imagine a group of individuals coming together to establish rules for their community. Instead of basing these rules on personal interests or subjective preferences, contractualism suggests that these rules should be agreed upon by all members of the community as fair and just. For example, consider the decision to stop at red lights while driving. Contractualism would argue that this rule is justified because it promotes safety and fairness on the roads, and it's a rule that all rational agents can agree upon for the well-being of everyone. The key idea here is that moral principles are based on the mutual agreement of rational agents. Unlike other moral frameworks that focus on individual rights or consequences, contractualism emphasizes the importance of collective deliberation and consensus in determining what is morally right or wrong. Religious ethics. Religious ethics encompasses moral principles and guidelines derived from religious teachings, beliefs, and traditions. It provides a framework for ethical decision-making, rooted in the values and teachings of various faith traditions around the world. Religious ethics often draws from sacred texts, scriptures, and teachings of religious figures to provide moral guidance for believers. These teachings outline principles of right and wrong conduct, as well as virtues to cultivate and vices to avoid. For example, in Christianity, the Golden Rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, emphasizes the importance of treating others with kindness and compassion. The core idea behind religious ethics is the belief that moral principles are grounded in the divine will or commandments of a higher power. Adherents often view following these ethical teachings as not only a moral duty, but also a means of seeking spiritual growth and connection with the divine. Virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is a moral framework that focuses on the development of virtuous character traits and moral virtues as the foundation for ethical behavior. Unlike other moral theories that emphasize rules or consequences, virtue ethics centers on the cultivation of virtuous qualities within oneself. Let's delve into this concept. In virtue ethics, the emphasis is not on what actions we should perform or what outcomes we should achieve, but rather on who we should be as individuals. It encourages us to reflect on the kind of person we aspire to become and to cultivate moral virtues that guide our actions. For example, virtues such as honesty, compassion, courage, humility, and integrity are seen as essential qualities to strive for in virtue ethics. These virtues are not simply rules to follow, but are embodied traits that shape our character and influence our behavior in various situations. The core idea behind virtue ethics is that moral goodness is not just about performing specific actions or following rules, but about developing a virtuous character that leads to a flourishing and fulfilling life.